In the measureless eons before time was given a name, there existed only the celestial expanse of heaven, a realm of pure light, symphony, and perfect order, bathed in the eternal glory of the Almighty. Here, amidst the seraphic choirs and the legions of archangels, dwelled Lucifer, the star of the morning, brightest of all beings forged by the divine hand. His beauty was a marvel, his wisdom profound, and his station was second only to the unseen throne. Yet, within this vessel of perfection, a seed of pride, dark and insidious, began to sprout. When the Father Eternal proclaimed his begotten Son as the anointed head of all creation, a fire of envy ignited in Lucifer's heart. How could another be placed above him, the most radiant of angels? This spark of resentment, fanned by whispers to his closest peers, grew into a raging inferno of rebellion. He rallied a third of heaven's host to his banner, promising them liberation from what he called servitude, and waged a war of unimaginable fury against the throne of God. For 3 celestial days, the heavens trembled. The clash of ethereal swords and the splintering of diamond shields echoed through the Empyrean. But the might of the rebels, however formidable, could not stand against the power of the Son, who rode forth in a chariot of divine wrath. With a storm of lightning and holy fire, he drove Lucifer and his legions from the celestial plains. They fell, headlong, from the zenith of glory, plummeting through the void for 9 days and 9 nights, a cascade of dying stars extinguished from the book of life. Their fall ended not in gentle repose, but in a liquid continent of fire, a burning marl that was the very floor of hell. Here, in this abyss named Tartarus, they lay, vanquished and stunned, chained upon the fiery waves. The air was a furnace, yet the flames gave no light, only a darkness visible, a terrifying gloom that served to reveal sights of woe, regions of sorrow, and doleful shades where peace and rest could never dwell. The first deeds, fearless, endangered heaven's perpetual king, and put to proof his high supremacy. Too well I see and rue the dire event that with sad overthrow and foul defeat hath lost us heaven. He feared the Almighty had left them their spirits and strength only to suffer eternal punishment, to be his slaves in the heart of hell. But Satan's pride would not countenance despair. He scoffed at the notion of servitude. Fallen cherub, to be weak is miserable, doing or suffering, he declared, his voice a clarion call of defiance. But of this be sure, to do aught good never will be our task, but ever to do ill our sole delight, as being the contrary to his high will whom we resist. If then his providence out of our evil seek to bring forth good, our labor must be to pervert that end, and out of good still to find means of evil. A new, more insidious plan began to form in his mind. Direct conflict had failed, but rumors had long circulated in heaven of a new world, a new race of beings to be created, fashioned in the Almighty's image and beloved by him. What if they could not storm heaven's gates? What if, instead, they could corrupt this new creation, turn God's beloved into his enemies? A proxy war, fought not in the celestial planes, but in the hearts of these yet unborn creatures. A mind not to be changed by place or time, Satan roared, his form beginning to rise from the burning lake. The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. What matter where, if I be still the same? and what I should be, all but less than he whom thunder hath made greater. Here at least we shall be free, here we may reign secure, and in my choice, to reign is worth ambition though in hell. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. With this resolution he spread his vast leathery wings, a span that could have shadowed an entire nation, and lifted himself from the fire. Beelzebub followed. They flew over the desolate, burning landscape, a place of sorrowful wastes and frozen continents. Having found a stretch of solid ground, a desolate plain of scorched earth and black stone, Satan stood tall. His stature reached the sky, and on his shoulder his massive shield, like the moon viewed through a telescope, was hung. His spear, to which the tallest pine on a Norwegian hill were but a wand, he wielded to support his uneasy steps over the burning marl. He looked back at the lake of fire and saw his legions, innumerable as the autumn leaves that strew the brooks in Vallombrosa, lying stupefied and overthrown. He had to rouse them. He had to forge this broken, shamed army into a new instrument of vengeance. He ascended a promontory of igneous rock and called out, his voice echoing across the infernal wastes, a sound so powerful it shook the very foundations of hell. Princes, potentates, warriors, the flower of heaven, once yours, now lost. Awake, arise, or be forever fallen. As if struck by his words, the legions began to stir. A murmur rose, then a groan, then the clatter of 1,000,000 pieces of celestial armor as the fallen angels rose from their fiery trance. They recognized the voice of their great commander and gathered around him, their forms a grotesque parody of their former angelic beauty. Some were scarred by celestial lightning, others missing wings, their faces etched with the agony of their fall and the shame of defeat. They were a disheveled, wounded multitude, their spirits as broken as their bodies. Satan addressed them, his words a balm of pride and a poison of hatred. He reminded them of their glory, of the courage they had shown. He twisted their defeat into a strategic retreat, a temporary setback. He spoke of a new beginning, a new kingdom to be built in this abyss. All is not lost, he proclaimed. The unconquerable will and study of revenge, immortal hate, and courage never to submit or yield. And what is else not to be overcome? That glory never shall his wrath or might extort from me. He informed them that their names had been erased from the books of life in heaven, but that this was not an end. Here, in their own domain, they could be kings, nay, they could be of Mammon, who had an eye for such things. And the architect Lucifer, a host of demons, delved into a massive hill, unearthing veins of gold and precious minerals. With astonishing speed, born of infernal energy, they erected a structure of breathtaking, terrible grandeur. It rose like an exhalation from the ground, a temple palace of gold and bronze, with Doric pillars, architraves, and cornices. Its scale dwarfed any mortal creation, and it was illuminated not by sunlight, but by 1,000,000 naphtha and asphalt lamps that cast a lurid, spectral glow. They called it Pandemonium, the place of all demons. It was here, in this grand, unholy capital, that the Great Council would be held to decide the future of their war against heaven. The legions of lesser spirits shrank themselves down to pygmy size to fit within its vast hall, while their giant leaders, the 1,000 demigods, assembled for their first parliament in hell.
The great hall of Pandemonium was a scene of somber majesty. The giant forms of the archfiends sat in council, their faces illuminated by the infernal light, a gallery of fallen gods plotting the doom of a world yet to be born. Satan sat upon a throne of royal state, which far outshone the wealth of Ormus and of Ind. He was honest with his peers. He did not sugarcoat their defeat. The war in heaven had been a catastrophic loss, and a direct assault was likely impossible. He opened the floor, inviting any to speak their mind. The first to rise was Moloch, his scarred face a testament to his fury. He was all fire and violence, a being of pure, unadulterated rage. His counsel was simple and brutal. Open war. "My sentence is for open war," he growled, his voice like rocks grinding together. "Of wiles more inexpert I boast not. Them let those contrive who need, or when they need, not now. For while they sit contriving, shall the rest, millions that stand in arms, and longing wait the signal to ascend, sit lingering here, heaven's fugitives, and for their dwelling place accept this dark, opprobrious den of shame, the prison of his tyranny who reigns by our delay? No. Let us rather choose, armed with hell flames and fury, all at once o'er heaven's high towers to force resistless way. What can be worse than to dwell here, driven out from bliss, condemned in this abhorred deep to utter woe, where pain of inextinguishable fire must exercise us without hope of end? No, nothing is to be lost. To be free from this pit is gain enough." His plan, born of desperation and a thirst for vengeance, was met with a murmur of grim approval from the more warlike demons. Next to speak was Belial, and his manner was the very antithesis of Moloch's. He was graceful, his words smooth and persuasive, but his heart was hollow and false. He argued not for war, but for caution, clothing his cowardice in the robes of reason. "I should be much for open war, O peers," he began, his voice a silken melody, "as not behind in hate."
Another hopeless war. Let us not then pursue, by force impossible, by leave obtained unacceptable, though in heaven our state of splendid vassalage, he argued, but rather seek our own good from ourselves, and from our own live to ourselves. Though in this vast recess, free, and to none accountable, preferring hard liberty before the easy yoke of servile pomp. Our greatness will appear then most conspicuous, when great things of small, useful of hurtful, prosperous of adverse, we can create. This desert soil wants not her hidden luster, gems and gold. Let us build here a kingdom that can rival heaven's magnificence. Let us make this our empire. This idea, to build a glorious kingdom in hell, was met with the loudest applause yet. It appealed to their pride and their desire to create, to mock heaven with an empire of their own making. The final speaker was Beelzebub, second only to Satan in power and intellect. He rose with a gravitas that commanded silence. He dismissed the other plans. Open war was folly. Submission was unthinkable. And building a kingdom in hell was merely accepting their prison. He then unveiled the plan he and Satan had conceived on the shores of the fiery lake. "There is another way," he announced, his deep voice filling the hall. "You have heard the tales, the whispers in heaven before our fall, of a new world and a new race called man, created in God's image to be his new delight. This race will be placed on a world suspended between heaven and hell. Here is our path to revenge. Let us not assail heaven directly, but strike at God through his new, beloved creation. We can seduce them to our cause, corrupt them, and bring them down into our ruin. Or, if not, we can destroy their world and turn their paradise into a wasteland. This would be a vengeance far sweeter than another failed battle, for it would inflict upon God a sorrow deeper than any wound we could deal his armies. The hall erupted. This plan was Satan's journey from the gates of Pandemonium was a descent into ever deeper layers of despair and desolation. He traversed continents of solid fire and frozen wastes, crossing raging rivers of molten rock and stagnant oceans of ice. His destination was the ninefold gate of hell, the only exit from their infernal prison. The gates were a terrifying sight. 3 of brass, 3 of iron, and 3 of adamantine, each set, barred, and locked. But it was the guardians of the gate that gave him pause. 2 monstrous figures stood before it. The first was a creature of horrifying hybridity, the upper body of a beautiful woman, but from the waist down she was a coiling, scaly serpent. A pack of hellhounds, yelping and snarling, surrounded her, at times retreating into her womb, only to emerge again, forever tearing at her insides. The second figure was a formless shadow, a being of pure darkness that wore a crown upon what seemed to be a head. It was the embodiment of utter dread. Satan, undaunted, approached and demanded passage. The serpentine woman looked at him, and her eyes held a flicker of recognition and horror. "Hast thou forgot me then?" she hissed. "And do I seem now in thine eye so foul? Know that I am thy daughter, sprung from thy head, a goddess armed. When in the great assembly of the gods thy bold conspiracy against heaven's king first rose, thou calledst me sin." She recounted their twisted history. Satan, captivated by her beauty, had impregnated her. The offspring of their incestuous union was the shadowy figure beside her, Death. Death, in turn, had raped his own mother, Sin, and from that violation was born the pack of hounds that now tormented her eternally. They were his children, Sin and Death, and they held the keys to the gates of hell. At first, Death, his shapeless form bristling with fury, threatened Satan. But the archfiend was not one to be intimidated by his own progeny. He realized they were not his enemies, but his natural allies. He explained his plan: to journey to the new world of Earth, to corrupt mankind, and to make them subjects of sin and treading on solid ground that would melt away beneath him, at other times swimming through thick, cloying air. Halfway through this maddening void, he came upon the throne of chaos himself, a dark pavilion spread wide on the wasteful deep. With him sat his consort, ancient Night, and beside them stood Orcus and Hades, and the dreaded name of Demogorgon. Satan, presenting himself not as a conqueror but as an explorer, addressed the throne. "I come no spy," he declared, "with purpose to explore or to disturb the secrets of your realm, but by constraint wandering this darksome desert, as my way lies through your spacious empire up to light." He explained his plan to corrupt the new world, arguing that his victory would extend the reign of chaos and night, bringing discord and uncreation to God's orderly new world. "Yours be the advantage all, mine the revenge." Chaos, an enemy of order, was intrigued. The prospect of reclaiming territory from the Creator was appealing. The ancient abyss pointed Satan in the direction of a distant glimmer, a faint light hanging like a pendant world. "Go and speed," Chaos rumbled. "Havoc and spoil and ruin are my gain." Satan, renewed, flew toward the light. Behind him, he knew, his children, Sin and Death, were already at work, building a great causeway, a broad and beaten path over the dark abyss, connecting the gates of hell directly to the fragile new world of Earth.
The path for all demons to follow was being paved, while Satan struggled through the chaos. A very different scene unfolded in the Empyrean realms of heaven. From his throne of pure light, the Almighty Father, whose gaze pierces all of time and space, watched everything transpire. He saw the proud rebel struggling through the abyss. He saw the new world, Earth, floating in its sea of azure. He saw Satan's goal and knew his dark purpose. He turned to his only begotten Son, who sat at his right hand, radiating grace and divine compassion. Only begotten Son. The Father's voice was the music of creation itself. Seest thou what rage transports our adversary? He who of all the spirits of heaven stood up in high preeminence, now bent on revenge, journeys to the new world. He seeks to destroy our latest creation, man, or to pervert him. And man will hearken to his glozing lies and easily transgress the sole command, the sole pledge of his obedience. So will he fall, he and his faithless progeny. The Father's words were not of anger, but of cosmic certainty. He explained that man's fall would not be the fault of his Creator. Whose fault? Whose but his own? I made him just and right, sufficient to have stood, though free to fall. Such I created all the ethereal powers and spirits, both them who stood and them who failed. Freely they stood who stood, and fell who fell. He elaborated on the core of his creation, free will. Without the freedom to choose, obedience was meaningless. Love was an automaton's response. He had given man this freedom, this most precious and perilous gift. Man's downfall would come from this freedom, but it was also the only source of his potential for true love and true virtue. The Son, whose countenance was a perfect blend of majesty and mercy, looked upon the Father. O Father, gracious was that word which closed thy sovereign sentence, that man should find grace, he replied. For should man finally be lost, should man, thy creature late so loved, thy youngest son, fall circumvented thus by fraud, though joined with his own folly? That be from thee far, shall grace not find means. Behold me then, me for him, life for life I offer. On me, let thine anger fall. Account me man. I for his sake will leave thy bosom, and this glory next to thee freely put off, and for him lastly die, well pleased. On me, let death wreak all his rage. The Father looked upon his Son with infinite love. This was the plan from the beginning. This was the ultimate answer to the evil that Satan was about to unleash. The Son's sacrifice would pay the debt of mankind, defeating death and sin, and offering a path to redemption for all who chose to accept it. While Satan plotted a temporary victory of corruption and ruin, a far greater, eternal victory of love and sacrifice was already being ordained in the highest heaven. The great paradox was set. From man's fall would come a greater rising, and from Satan's evil would ultimately spring a good beyond his comprehension. After his arduous journey, Satan finally broke through the tumultuous chaos and found himself in the serene, ordered cosmos. Below him hung the new world, a globe of radiant beauty, bathed in the golden light of its sun. He landed upon the outer shell of this new creation, a vast and lonely expanse. In the distance, he saw a magnificent structure, a gate of jacinth and gold, with a stairway of stone reaching up into the highest heaven, a connection between the mortal and the divine. The sight of this world, so perfect, so beloved by his enemy, filled Satan with a torment of conflicting emotions. Awe at its beauty mingled with a bitter, burning jealousy. This was the world given to man, a creature of dust, while he, the star of the morning, was condemned to a pit of fire. The pain of his lost glory was a fresh, raw wound. Drawn by the brilliance of the sun, which he mistook for a lesser heaven, he flew toward it. There, upon a sun-drenched hill, he saw a glorious figure, an archangel whom he recognized as Uriel, the regent of the sun, one of the 7 who stand in God's presence. To approach such a being in his true form was impossible. Deceit was now his only art. He transformed his shape, contracting his scarred, immense form into that of a cherub, a beautiful, innocent-looking youth with flowing golden hair and fledgling wings. He approached Uriel with a face of feigned curiosity and pious zeal. "Uriel," he began, his voice tuned to a key of youthful innocence, "I have come down from the choirs of heaven to behold this new world, this marvel of our great Creator's hand. I burn with a desire to know his works, and chiefly man, his chief delight and favor. Tell me, great regent, where is his abode? In what blessed grove does this new favorite dwell, that I may gaze upon him and glorify our Maker?" Uriel, whose piercing sight could discern the hearts of men, was fooled by the perfect disguise. A cherub's face is one of pure joy and sincerity, and he saw no reason to doubt. He was pleased.
Friendly voice, and add thy name, O sun, to tell thee how I hate thy beams, that bring to my remembrance from what state I fell. For a moment, a flicker of genuine remorse touched his heart. He questioned his path. Could he repent? Could he return to heaven? But pride, his original sin, answered for him. The shame of returning, of bowing before the Son whom he had defied, was a torment greater than hell itself. He concluded that even if he were forgiven, he could never be the same. The same ambition would rise again. So farewell hope, and with hope farewell fear, farewell remorse, he declared, his face contorting into a mask of grim resolve. All good to me is lost. Evil, be thou my good. He had passed the point of no return. His only path forward was to spread sin and evil, to make this paradise a mirror of his own damned soul. Unknown to him, Uriel, from his perch on the sun, had been watching. He noticed the rapid, violent changes in the cherub's expression, from zeal to envy, from sorrow to rage. Such turmoil was alien to the pure beings of heaven. Suspicion dawned in the archangel's mind. He realized he had been deceived. Swift as a sunbeam, he shot down to the gates of paradise to warn the archangel Gabriel, the guardian of Eden, that one of the fallen had breached their world and was now loose in the garden. An impostor was among them. Having conquered his last vestiges of doubt, Satan leaped over the wall of paradise. He cared not for the gate, for stealth and contempt were his methods now. He landed within the sacred garden, and the air itself, pure and fragrant, seemed to recoil from his unholy presence. He perched, in the form of a cormorant, atop the tallest tree in the garden, the tree of life. From this vantage point, he surveyed God's masterpiece. It was a place of perfect harmony, a verdant land of rolling hills, crystal-clear rivers, and shady groves. Animals of all kinds played peacefully, the lion with the lamb, the serpent with the dove. But his gaze was drawn to 2 noble creatures who walked upright, their forms radiating a grace and innocence that was both beautiful and agonizing for him to behold. They were Adam and Eve, rulers of this idyllic world. He watched them, their simple majesty, their loving interactions, and a fresh wave of rage and jealousy washed over him. "Oh, hell," he muttered to himself, "what do mine eyes with grief behold?" Into our room of bliss thus high advanced creatures of other mould, earthborn perhaps, not spirits, yet to heaven's angels equal, if not half round, for whom all this was made, all this for them, and I, for this, cast out. He remembered his mission. These two beings were the key. He listened as they spoke, overhearing Adam gently remind Eve of their blissful state and their singular prohibition from God. They could enjoy everything in this paradise, but they were forbidden to eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil on pain of death. This was the weakness he would exploit. As night fell, a silver moon rose over the garden. The angelic guard, led by the mighty archangel Gabriel, began their watch. Gabriel, having been warned by Uriel, was on high alert. He dispatched two of his swiftest angels, Ithuriel and Zephon, to search the garden for the intruder. They found Satan, his form now changed from a bird to a toad, squatting by the ear of the of harm. Gabriel would have none of it. He saw through the lies, the thin veil of arrogance covering a heart of pure malice. To say and straight unsay, pretending first wise to fly pain, professing next the spy, argues no leader, but a liar traced. Satan, and you are known, Gabriel retorted. I know thy strength, and thou knowest mine. Back to thy punishment, false fugitive, and to thy speed add wings, lest with a whip of scorpions I pursue thy lingering, or with one stroke of this dart strange horror seize thee, and pangs unfelt before. The threat enraged Satan. His pride could not bear such an insult. His form swelled, his eyes blazed, and he prepared for a physical confrontation. Gabriel too drew his celestial blade. The very air of paradise grew cold and tense as the two mighty archangels postured, ready to engage in a battle that would have shattered the peace of the garden forever. But before a single blow could be struck, a sign appeared in the heavens. A pair of golden scales, the same scales used to weigh the outcome of all creation, materialized in the night sky. In one pan, Gabriel saw the consequences of a fight. In the other, Satan's retreat. The pan showing his retreat sank low, a clear sign from heaven that he could not win this battle. Satan saw it too. He knew his own strength, but he also knew the power of the one who had sent the sign. With a snarl of frustrated rage, he turned and fled, melting into the darkness. The immediate threat was gone, but the serpent had found the garden, and he would return. The first shadow had fallen upon paradise. The next morning, the sun rose on an Eden that was outwardly as perfect as ever. But a seed of disquiet had been planted in the heart of Eve. She woke from a troubled sleep and recounted a disturbing dream to Adam. "O Adam, I have dreamed a dream of offense and trouble," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Methought I was woken by a voice, soft and alluring, calling my name. I followed the sound to the tree of knowledge. There I saw one in shape like to the angels, yet bright and beautiful. He plucked the fruit and ate, and then he turned to me." She described how the angelic figure in her dream had praised her beauty and encouraged her to taste the fruit herself. "Taste this," he said, "and be henceforth among the gods, thyself a goddess." He told me the fruit would not bring death, but life and knowledge and godhood. He held the fruit to my lips, and I, in my sleep, did eat, and I flew up to the clouds, filled with a joy I had never known. The dream ended with the angel disappearing, leaving her alone.
Adam was deeply concerned. He held her close and did his best to reassure her. He explained that dreams were not always portents of the future, that evil could be presented to the mind without leaving a stain, as long as the will disapproved. "Be not disheartened, then, nor cloud those looks," he comforted her. "Evil into the mind of God or man may come and go so unapproved, and leave no spot or blame behind. But in heaven, the Almighty knew that this was more than a mere dream. It was the first volley in Satan's assault. Though he knew his human creations had the free will to resist, he chose to offer them further guidance. He would not leave them to face this trial without a clear and explicit warning. He summoned the archangel Raphael, the affable angel, the sociable spirit. "Raphael," God commanded, "thou hearest what stir on earth Satan from hell, escaped through the darksome gulf, hath raised in paradise. Go therefore, half this day as friend with friend converse with Adam, in what bower or shade thou find'st him from the heat of noon retired, and tell him withal his danger, and from whom. What enemy, late fallen himself from heaven,
Puzzled him. How could any creature of God, perfect and living in bliss, willingly choose to disobey their Creator? Raphael's face grew solemn. "To answer thy question, Adam," the archangel began, "is to recount a tale of sorrow and of war, a history that shook the foundations of heaven itself. It is the story of pride, of envy, and of the one you must now fear. It is the story of Satan." Raphael prepared to tell Adam the cautionary tale of the war in heaven, a story meant to arm him with the knowledge he would need to face the temptation that was sure to come. "Listen, Adam," Raphael began, his voice a solemn and resonant chord, "and let my words be a shield for your heart. Heaven was a realm of perfect peace, a symphony of praise, until the day the Almighty Father, to test the obedience of his angels, made a proclamation. He presented his begotten Son and declared him the anointed King, commanding all in heaven to bow down and confess him Lord." Raphael described how most of heaven rejoiced, but one angel, Satan, preeminent in power and glory, felt a surge of envy. He saw the Son's exaltation as a diminution of his own status. That night, he summoned his own legion, and under the pretense of preparing a celebration, he sowed the first seeds of rebellion. "Will ye submit your necks?" Satan had asked his followers, his words dripping with scorn, "and choose to bend the supple knee? Ye will not, if I trust to know ye right, who can introduce law and edict on us, who without law err not, seeing we were ordained to govern, not to serve." Raphael recounted the impassioned defiance of a single seraph in Satan's legion, an angel named Abdiel. As Satan spoke of rebellion, Abdiel alone stood up to him. "O argument blasphemous, false and proud," Abdiel had cried out. "Shalt thou give law to God? Cease then this impious rage, and tempt not these, but hasten to appease the incensed father and the incensed son, while pardon may be found in time besought." Satan and his followers had laughed Abdiel to scorn, and the loyal angel, seeing his words were in vain, had flown back to the throne of God, a solitary beacon of faithfulness. "And so the war began," Raphael continued. Satan and his host, a third of heaven's angels, marched toward the sacred mount of God. The faithful angels, led by the archangel Michael, prepared for battle. The first day's conflict was terrible. Swords of celestial temper clashed, and the plains of heaven ran with ethereal ichor. The rebels fought with desperate fury, but Michael, with a mighty blow from his sword, cataclysmic scene, the rebels being driven to the edge of heaven,
a crystal wall that opened to reveal a gaping chasm into the void. Headlong themselves, they threw down from the verge of heaven, he concluded. Eternal wrath burnt after them to the bottomless pit. He looked at Adam, his tale complete. This, Adam, is the enemy who now roams your world. He is defeated, but not destroyed. His envy and his thirst for revenge are aimed at you. He wishes to drag you down into his own ruin, to make you a partner in his damnation. Be wary, be vigilant, and above all, be obedient. Your strength lies not in your own power, but in your faith and love for your Creator. He has given you free will, the power to stand. Do not let yourself be deceived. The story was a stark and terrifying warning. The fate of heaven's third lay before Adam as a map of the consequences of a single act of disobedience.
The weight of Raphael's warning settled upon Adam. He understood the gravity of the threat, the cosmic stakes of his obedience. Yet, in the face of this knowledge, a simple, seemingly innocent decision would set the stage for tragedy. The next morning, as they prepared for their daily, pleasant labor of tending the garden, Eve made a suggestion. Adam, well may we labor still to dress this garden, still to tend, plant, herb and flower. But our work grows on us. Let us divide our labors. Thou where choice leads thee, I where it calls. For while so near each other thus all day, our task we send, looking into the other's eyes. She argued that if they worked separately, they could accomplish twice as much. Adam was reluctant. He gently reminded her of the warning they had received. The wife, where danger or dishonor lurks, safest and seemliest by her husband stays, he advised. The enemy is near. Let us not seek temptation, but rather face it together. For the strength of one is multiplied in two. But Eve, with a touch of wounded pride, felt he was doubting her strength. She insisted she could stand on her own, that her virtue would be proven by facing temptation and overcoming it. Reluctantly, seeing her desire, Adam agreed. Go, he said, for thy stay, not free, absents thee more. Go in thy native innocence. They parted, each going their separate way into the verdant garden. Satan, who had been lurking, saw his opportunity. He had returned to Eden, this time taking the form of a serpent, the most subtle of all beasts. He found Eve alone among a grove of roses, her beauty and innocence a painful reminder of all he had lost. This was the moment he had schemed for, journeyed for, and damned himself for. He approached her not as a fearsome beast, but as a creature of wondrous intelligence. He coiled himself into a tower of emerald scales, his head held high, and began to speak, his voice a mesmerizing, flattering whisper. Wonder not, sovereign mistress, the serpent hissed, that I thus approach you, and gaze insatiate. Thee all things living gaze on, all things thine by gift, and thy celestial beauty adore with ravish perfect than before. Will God punish you for seeking knowledge, for aspiring to be more than you are? No. The threat of death is but a tool to keep you low, to keep you in ignorance. He forbids this fruit because he knows that on the day you eat it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be as gods, knowing good and evil. He keeps this power for himself. He flattered her, praised her beauty, and painted a glorious picture of her potential. She could be a goddess. Why should she be confined to earth when she could be worshipped? The words were a potent poison, appealing to her curiosity, her ambition, and her pride. She stood before the tree, her resolve wavering. The fruit looked so desirable. The serpent's words seemed so reasonable. Surely such a small act couldn't bring about the end of everything. Adam's fears must have been exaggerated. Reaching out her hand, she plucked a fruit. The earth felt the wound, and nature, from her seat, sighing through all her works, gave signs of woe that all was lost. She took a bite. For a moment she felt invigorated, intoxicated with a sense of power and liberation. But this feeling soon gave way to a cold dread. The deed was done. Not knowing what to do, she sought out Adam. If she could convince him to eat as well, then their sin would be equal, their fates intertwined. She found him, and with a feverish excitement told him what she had done. She offered him the fruit. Adam stood frozen, a garland of flowers he had been weaving for her falling from his hand. He was horrified. He knew instantly that she was lost, but his love for her was all-encompassing. The thought of a life in paradise without her was an agony worse than death. His choice was simple and terrible: to remain with her in sin and death, or to live alone in a paradise that would now be a desolate prison. "I with thee have fixed my lot," he said, his voice thick with sorrow, certain to undergo like doom. "If death consort with thee, death is to me as life." So forcible within my heart I feel.
The angels who had failed to prevent Satan's entry returned to heaven to report the tragic news. But the Almighty was already aware, having observed the entire sorry spectacle. He absolved them of any guilt, for this fall was a consequence of man's free will, which he had allowed. He declared that he would send his Son, not in wrath, but as a judge, to pronounce the sentence upon the sinners. The Son descended to the garden, his divine radiance now a source of terror to the fallen pair. They hid themselves among the trees, their newfound shame making them flee from the presence of their Creator. "Adam, where art thou?" the Son's voice called out, gentle yet firm. Adam, trembling, emerged from his hiding place. "I heard thy voice in the garden, and I was afraid, because I was naked, and I hid myself." "Who told thee that thou wast naked?" the Son asked. "Hast thou eaten of the tree whereof I commanded thee that thou shouldest not eat?" Adam, in a moment of weakness, cast the blame upon Eve. "The woman whom thou gavest to be with me, she gave me of the tree, and I did eat." The Son then turned to Eve. "What is this that thou hast done?" Eve in turn blamed the serpent. "The serpent beguiled me, and I did eat." The judgment was then pronounced upon all three parties. To the serpent, the Son declared, "Because thou hast done this, thou art cursed above all cattle. Upon thy belly shalt thou go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life. And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel." This was the first prophecy of a future Redeemer who would ultimately crush the serpent's power. To Eve, he said, "I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee." And to Adam, "Because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree, cursed is the ground for thy sake. In sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. In the sweat of thy face." Creation. How man was now theirs, and how the world was open to them. He paused, expecting a roar of applause, a deafening cheer for their triumph. But the only sound he heard was a chorus of hissing. He looked out at his followers and saw a horrifying transformation. One by one they were contorting, their limbs shrinking, their bodies elongating, their proud angelic forms melting away into those of monstrous, crawling snakes. As he watched, he felt the change in himself. His legs fused together, his arms withered into his sides. He tried to speak, but only a forked tongue flickered from his mouth. Their great victory had turned to ash. As a final torturous punishment,
a grove of trees identical to the tree of knowledge sprang up in hell. The serpent demons, tormented by hunger and thirst, would crawl to the trees and bite into the fruit, only to find their mouths filled with bitter ashes and soot. This was their eternal reward. Meanwhile, as promised to their father, sin and death arrived on earth. God told his angels that he would allow them to remain there, plaguing mankind until Judgment Day. The earth itself was changed. The perfect climate was shattered. Humans would now have to endure blistering heat and brutal cold. Animals began to turn on each other and on man, who was no longer their peaceful ruler, but now their prey. The age of innocence was over.
The period that followed the judgment was one of despair for Adam and Eve. They wept, they lamented their lost paradise, and they continued to blame one another. But slowly, through their shared misery, a sense of remorse and repentance began to grow. They turned to God in prayer, confessing their sin and begging for forgiveness. Their prayers were heard. In heaven, the Son presented their contrition to the Father, who, in his mercy, accepted it. However, they could no longer remain in the sacred garden. Their sin had made paradise unfit for them, and them unfit for paradise. The task of expelling them was given to the archangel Michael. He descended to earth, not in wrath, but with a somber dignity. He found Adam and Eve and told them they must leave the garden. Eve wept bitterly at the news of leaving her home, her flowers, her shady bowers, but Michael brought with him a message of comfort and hope. He explained that, though they were losing a physical paradise, they had the chance to find a paradise within, through a life of honesty, faith, and virtue. If they lived such a life, then upon death, they would be reunited with God in heaven. He also revealed God's ultimate plan of redemption, that the Son himself would one day become human and pay for their sins with his own life, thereby conquering death and reopening the path to eternal life. To give Adam a fuller understanding of what lay ahead for his descendants, Michael took him to the highest hill in paradise and showed him a series of visions of the future of humanity. Adam saw the first murder, Cain slaying Abel. He saw the wickedness of mankind growing, leading to the great flood, with only Noah and his family saved. He saw the Tower of Babel, a monument to human arrogance. But he also saw moments of faith and hope. He saw the covenant with Abraham, the trials of Moses, and the giving of the law. Michael explained the future of mankind after the flood, a long and often tragic history of war, sin, and suffering, but always punctuated by the promise of redemption. By the end of this long vision, Adam was no longer in despair.